Just thinking about international law, I have such complicated feelings about the concept because I genuinely love it, right? And I think it's such an important tool for us to have. But of course, it doesn't solve our problems.
No.
It's not the kind of thing you just magically there's a law here and they will all stop. I mean, that's not how international law works. It's a tool and it's so slow.
Yeah.
And it really works over decades, not over days.
Exactly.
But seeing the South African government bring this case to the International Court of Justice, we're now seeing the consequences of that starting to trickle in, and particularly the consequences on arms trade and arms transfers to Israel.
Exactly. When that case was brought and the ICJ made that ruling, one thing that we heard a lot in the media and by different was that it doesn't matter because it can't be enforced, that Israel, they won't care, so it doesn't really matter what they do. But you're saying that it's starting to have an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just the ICJ order, but also other international law. So, for example, there's this treaty called the Arms Trade Treaty that is supposed to prevent arms sales to human rights violators, places where international humanitarian law is violated, cases where there's genocide happening, for example, and these different issues. But what's really interesting now, for example, just recently, a Dutch court ruled that the Dutch government has to stop selling parts to these airplanes, F-35s, to Israel because of the Arms Trade Treaty and because of the grave risk of human rights and international humanitarian law violations. And the Dutch government has a week to comply with this order. And I think that's really important. We've seen other cases such as a Japanese company referring to the ICJ order as a reason why they're cutting a cooperation agreement with an Israeli defense company. We've seen a regional government withdrawing export licenses in Belgium for ammunition that was sort of going to Israel otherwise. Because of the ICJ order. Italy has announced that they're stopping to give new export licenses of weapons to Israel. This has real impact, right? So this Dutch court ruling was brought by NGOs, Oxfam Netherlands, Pax, and a few others that basically sued the government over this. There are similar court cases in the UK, in the US, all over the world right now, in Canada, I think as well, for countries that are supporting weapons to Israel. So again, it doesn't support people in Gaza right now. This is just one other of the many tools we have, and it's a really important tool that we can use to stop other countries from being complicit in this.
More than 10 years ago, governments came together and developed this arms trade treaty, the ATT, right? And I don't know what we expected. I've personally always thought of it as a little bit of a useless treaty because I find it very hard to see what its impact has been. And I feel that with this, what is happening now, that for the first time, I feel that reality is coming to the ATT. And that reality of the situation in Gaza, that humanitarian catastrophe, through the ICJ ruling, that has then, or the ICJ order, is then sort of suddenly making the ATT relevant again, because it can have an impact also in actually addressing, however inadequate, however insufficient, it can have an impact in minimizing, in the long term, the humanitarian consequences of these kind of actions.
Right now, we see the countries that are exporting weapons to Israel right now is, of course, the United States, Germany.
Yeah.
And they've increased a lot since the October 7th, hugely expanding the weapons that they're sending there. The United Kingdom, Netherlands, Canada, maybe Denmark. It's always difficult to know because some of these things are not very transparent. So, but I think Denmark is also one of those countries that are exporting parts of weapons to Israel. We've seen Italy say that they won't do it. We've seen Spain say that they won't do it. We've seen this Belgian regional government. I don't know what that means for Belgium as a whole.
Very complicated Belgium.
It's complicated Belgium. But we're seeing this kind of really interesting, and almost all of those countries, except the United States, are states parties to the Arms Trade Treaty. Exactly. And now with this Dutch ruling saying that sending these parts for these airplanes violates the ATT, violates these international law, suddenly, that will apply to all of the European or countries that have signed the ATT.
Exactly.
So I see a lot of prospects for other national legal processes to start right now.